Welcome back to Sika Strength, welcome back to Sika Stand. Today we're asking a very common question for hybrid athletes, and that is, what's the ideal weekly split? If you want more in-depth information like this, please click the link down below. That'll bring you to 30 days of hybrid insights. So we've combined our knowledge from the last 5 or 6 years of hybrid style training and given you an email a day for 30 days with all of these topics just in a small bit more detail and in written form. So as a hybrid athlete, we're left with a pretty difficult equation here where there's a lot of training to do for one goal, a lot of training to do for another goal. Maybe you've 2 or 3 goals running at the same time, and trying to fit all those things into an ideal week where you make sure you're still progressing, make sure you're getting all of your sessions in, and making sure you don't give yourself rhabdo or get injured is a pretty difficult thing to do. The first thing you really have to look at as a hybrid athlete is, can we periodize some of our year to make it a bit easier for ourselves? So what do we mean by this? Well, generally speaking, in periodized training plans, we pick 1 or 2 key goals for one area of our sport, whether that's gaining strength, gaining size, gaining power and speed, and we'll chase one of those things, really try and make big improvements in that one area while we kind of hold on to our other values. So let's say we're a track and field athlete, we're running 400 meters as an individual. You might take 2 months of the year where you really focus on your strength. Then you might have 2 months after that where you're really focusing on your speed and power. And then for the rest of the year, you're really focusing on running the actual event itself. In the rest of the year period there where we're really focusing on our running, we're just doing a bit of maintenance with that speed and power and strength work, and I'm really able to focus on our track work as best I possibly can without being weighed down by those heavy strength training sessions. As a hybrid athlete though, we're kind of caught in this catch-22. So I am trying to develop a lot of different variables at the same time, but a key aspect of hybrid training is that I'm doing them concurrently, and so maybe it's not actually possible to periodize out my year where I just do powerlifting for one period of the year and then I just do my fitness training for the rest of the year. If you're pretty steadfast in wanting to be concurrent for most of the year, so let's say in this case you want to do some weightlifting, so snatches and clean and jerks, and you want to do some sprinting as well. If you're fairly steadfast in the fact that you want to be concurrent, this weekly plan or the idea of how your week is going to be laid out is going to be incredibly important. And that's what we're going to dive into today. If you're not so steadfast in that, a much better system would be to be more periodized throughout the year. Give yourself the chance and the opportunity to focus on just 1 or 2 particular areas of your training and really make big improvements there, and then just have maybe 1/3 of your year where you're going to be concurrent and focus on both at the same time. So looking at this weekly plan, or how we're going to structure our training sessions throughout the week, then the number one thing you need to look at is losing from one aspect because of fatigue, because of generally being a bit worn down, because of not being able to fit it in, losing out on those training effects because of what's happened the day before or the session immediately prior to it. What do I mean by this? If you want to be running and squatting as your 2 kind of main goals, and you're going in for a running session on Wednesday, but you've done heavy squats on Tuesday, obviously the running session is going to be negatively affected by that. How can we start to work against that, or how can we start to plan to make sure that doesn't happen? Well, it starts a number of weeks prior to that, and it starts with looking at our large scale plan. So what we have here is we have our large scale plan for squats. What I'm going to be doing with my squats, how I want my squats to be improving or progressing from week to week. I must understand that there's going to be more difficult periods and easier periods as I go throughout this squat cycle. So let's say in the initial few weeks here, we have 4 sets of 10, we have multiple sets of 8, and these are going to be the real high volume squat sessions. Now, as I'm going through these squat sessions, I have an inherent understanding that that high volume work is going to really fatigue my legs. My central nervous system won't be too fatigued from it, but it's going to take a lot of energy. I'm going to be quite sore, achy and tired after those sessions. Now I'll look at my running programming alongside of this. Do you think it's going to be a really good idea to do very high intensity sprint work in the day immediately afterwards, or Is it going to be better to do one of those 3K or one of those 5K sessions after the big heavy squats? Well, obviously, it's going to be better to do that lower intensity, slightly longer distance running work when I'm doing the high volume squatting. So immediately now I'm going to be able to shift both of those programs and get them to line up slightly better. If I'm doing high volume work with the squats but quite low intensity, I'm going to look to do my kind of higher volume work with the running in that lower intensity bracket. Both of these things won't interact quite so negatively with each other as if I was trying to do maximum speed, maximum explosive work with the running while doing the real high volume work in the squats. The next thing I want you to look at then is have a look at how the programs will change throughout. So in our squat training, what we have is we have our high volume work at the start, and as I work down through that program, I'm going to eventually get to that lower volume, high intensity work. In this case, it's over the course of 12 weeks, but no matter what the length of your squat cycle, something similar to this should be happening. When we look at the running program then, what we actually have is something slightly different, but in a macro scale, the same thing is happening. So in the runs, you'll see the 5Ks and 3Ks and longer distance stuff stays in there, but what we get now is an added track session with that higher intensity interval training in there. So I'm essentially doing the same thing. The overall volume over the course of running is dropping down. The overall intensity is ramping up massively, but it's not in the individual sessions themselves. So when we talk about looking at the macro scale of the program and understanding how that plan for the week must be tailored to the macro scale, we have to understand that in running, those overall volume and intensities are going to be doing similar things to what they'll do in the squats, but it's not actually happening in the individual sessions themselves. Right, so now we have an understanding of how the macro might influence the micro or meso cycle. What I want you to think about now is how all of your training sessions leading up to this have made you feel. Now, the number one thing you can have is a training journal in these cases. Writing down how you feel as you go throughout a training block is a massively valuable tool to have at the ready. That's why on the Sika Strength app we have the training journal area. After every session you can jot down notes. This is a hugely valuable piece when I'm planning particularly hybrid training, because the feeling I have of whether I'm recovered or not recovered versus the outcome of that session is incredibly valuable. So if I'm coming through a squat cycle, I know that last time after week 6 of the squat cycle I was very fatigued. I know I'm not going to put a time trial in for my running on week 6 when I rerun that squat cycle. The other thing it can give you is a massive amount of confidence when you look back at an old training journal and you might see in week 2, 3 and 4 when the volume was very high, I felt very fatigued, but I was still able to progress through that entire squat cycle, was still able to make valuable increases in my 1RM, even though it felt like I might have been falling off the rails slightly at the start of it. Right, so how do we divide these sessions up over the course of the week? If we're looking at the squatting and running, we're going to look at the horse program and some interval training afterwards to give you a bit of a contrasting view of this. But let's say for the squatting and the running, we know we're going to have 2 squat sessions and 3 running sessions to do each week. I know that I'm not going to want to do the squat sessions when I'm at my most fatigued because they demand a certain level of performance from me. The second thing I know is that some of the running sessions can actually be done when I am quite fatigued. So as we said earlier, those 3Ks and those 5Ks, assuming they're not a time trial or assuming they don't demand an incredibly challenging pace from me, I know I can slot them in there when I mightn't feel great. So let's go back to our training journals once again. Let's say on Thursday mornings or Friday mornings when I go to train, I don't feel great. Or maybe on a Saturday morning, all of the fatigue from the week is just laying down on me and Saturday mornings aren't a great time for me to really push myself. Okay, let's do that first thing. I'm going to take those easier sessions, slot them in there. So I know I'm going to run on Thursday evening and Saturday morning, and the faster run or the more challenging run I'll have for that week, I'm going to put on Tuesday evening. The next thing I'm going to do is look in the areas for the week where I feel quite good and make sure they don't interplay or they don't negatively affect that faster run on Tuesday evenings. So the first thing I'm going to do is say Monday night is probably out for me for squatting. So I'm not going to do squats on Monday night. When can I do them? Well, I can certainly do them on Wednesday, or I could do them directly after my faster run on Tuesday evening. But let's say Wednesday evening I'm going to do squats. So I've fast run on Tuesday when I'm very fresh and very primed to do that harder run session. Then on Wednesday, I'm going to do my first squat session. On Thursday, we said we're going to do one of those easier, longer runs. On Friday, I'm going to do my second squat session. And then on Saturday, once again, when I don't feel great, I'm going to do one of those easier, longer running sessions. So when we're looking at this kind of weekly plan, I'm going to make it with the explicit understanding that certain days of the week I'm not going to feel great. Certain days of the week I might be caught for time, or I might know that the flow of my family schedule or the flow of my weekly work schedule is going to kind of have me down at this point. That's where we really look to first. Don't look for where you're going to be most fresh. Rather, you should be looking for the points where you know you're going to be at your lowest, and then either deviating training away from there, or I'm going to deviate my easier sessions into those slots. Let's look now at a combination of the horse program and one of our interval training programs. So this is the track running program on the app, and this is Horse 2. So Horse 2 is a strength and power training program. It's 4 sessions per week. We've got some plyometrics, so some really explosive jumping, bounding and landing work in there. I've got things like hang power cleans in there. I've got things like heavier squats and some upper body and midline bodybuilding and kind of hypertrophy work. These 4 sessions are quite difficult, but they definitely fit into a week very, very nicely. And then the second program I have here is the track running interval program. So what the track running interval program is, it assumes you can get to a soccer pitch or a football pitch or a running track twice per week. So you need basically a 400-meter loop where you can run these things. And it's usually multiple sets of 200, 400, 800 meter runs. There is some 1K work in there, but it's basically getting you back into running shape and then ramping up the intensity of the intervals once you get back in that good running shape. Neither of these sessions as you go throughout the week is going to be incredibly challenging in terms of intensity, but what you do need is to have a fairly well-fueled system before you go into that. So what do I mean by that? I mean, you can't necessarily do your gym session and then go straight out in the track and do your running afterwards unless you have some intra-workout carbs. You're better off to put these further away from those gym sessions and make sure you're well fueled and hydrated before you go into them. Okay, we have our 4 Horse 2 program sessions here. I'm going to go Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. So that gives me a nice kind of stretched out session throughout the week. I'm not going to be really fatigued coming in, going 1 session, 2 sessions, 3 sessions, 3 days in a row. I like doing Monday, Tuesday on a stacked kind of together one without a rest day in between, because it allows me to get a fair amount of work done at the start of the week, but also it gets a lot of that work done when I'm not fatigued. So usually I know I feel pretty good after the weekend. Monday, Tuesday, getting that really good start to the week kind of gives me a kick up the ass to make sure my schedule is on point. So Monday, Tuesday is session 1 and 2 of the horse program, and then Thursday and Saturday is session 3 and 4 of the horse program. Now, I'm going to get my running sessions in there, my intervals, and I'm actually going to do that running session on the Friday and on the Saturday evening. Why do I do this? Well, the first thing is, I think a rest day midweek is actually really valuable to you staying on course long term. These hybrid training systems are things you want to be doing basically forever, or you want to be running training like this for as long as you possibly can. And so in that case, I don't want to be getting into this massively fatigued trough in my training where I'm going Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday every single week and then having to take a prolonged deload afterwards. In this case, I'm going to do Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. I still have loads of rest as I go throughout the week. I basically get a full day off as I go throughout the week and allows me to stay in really good shape without being massively fatigued afterwards. If you'd like to see more in-depth pieces on these programs, just check out the free trial on the app. So it'll allow you to download the app, use the training programs for free for a week. You can actually have 2 programs running at one time, but you can also delete a program and get a new one. Let's say you download Horse 2 by accident and you want to see what Horse 1 looks like. You can run any of those programs at the same time. If you want more in-depth information like this, please click the link down below. That'll bring you to 30 days of hybrid insights. So we've combined our knowledge from the last 5 or 6 years of hybrid style training and given you an email a day for 30 days with all of these topics just in a small bit more detail and in written form. Thanks guys.